Juliana Stancampiano. I am the owner of Oxygen, and we are here, and I'm just gonna start diving into everything because we only have an hour today and a lot of content. We're here to talk about architecting learning experiences. This is something that over the years I've done a lot of work with, and my team has done a lot of work with, and we kind of came to a realization that a lot of people in our industry and designers start with the design and like diving into the details, and we like to kind of back up and do this work ahead of time. So we're not going to talk about anything that is really instructional design. We're going to talk about all the setup that we find really helpful to do ahead of that to ensure that you're aligned with your business and your stakeholders and kind of the process and how we break that down. So I'm excited to be here with you all today. As I said, Sarah Davis, a colleague of mine, is on, and she's going to be helping out as well to make this as interactive as possible in this lovely virtual environment. And we also have Matt Mobley, who's a volunteer with the Learnapalooza group, who's going to be helping out as well. So thank you to everybody that's helping to make this happen. As you can see, I've also written a book. I'm an author, wrote a book called Radical Outcomes. We're going to be covering some of the concepts that are in there today. And we're going to go ahead and just kick it off. Those are ways to connect with me, but I don't want to waste too much time on that. And the first thing we're going to do is hand over to Sarah to get us set up with the technology we're going to be using if you have or haven't used this during the presentation. So Sarah, you can take it away.
Awesome. Hi. So we are planning on using a program called Klaxoon today so that you guys can have kind of participate a little more actively in this presentation. And we have two different ways that you can access Klaxoon. The first is through your mobile device, which we recommend particularly so that you don't need to leave this presentation in order to participate. And so all you need to do for that is scan the QR code. You'll use your camera, just turn on your camera on your mobile device, scan the QR code, and it should pop up a notification that you click on. And then you'll just enter your nickname and join the meeting. For those of you who have the Klaxoon app on your phone, you do not need the Klaxoon app, but some people I know have used this in previous environments. You'll just have to enter the daily access code as well. That's right there. If you'd like to join on your browser, you just go to klaxoon.com, enter the daily access code, and then enter a nickname. In addition to that, if you're not comfortable using Klaxoon or you're having technical problems, we all know that happens, go ahead. We will make sure that we have everything on the screen as well so you can still participate. During our brainstorm activities, we have Matt who will be entering any comments on the screen so that you can also have that in your Klaxoon as well. So we'll give it a little bit. I've got about 38 people, it looks like, that have joined the Klaxoon.
Fantastic.
And you'll just want to keep this open at all times. There's no need to play around in Klaxoon. There's no need to use the chats. We're just going to use it for kind of straightforward activities. Looks like we have more people joining us. Okay. Okay, and we'll give it about 20 more seconds for everybody else to come in to the Klaxoon.
I think the other thing to note, Sarah, is that if people can't get in or don't join Klaxoon, we're asking Matt to be in it. And if you can't access it for some reason, to jump into the chat and put your answers, and he'll populate Klaxoon so we can see it all together.
Yep.
Awesome.
Awesome. Okay, go ahead. We will move on and start our first Klaxoon activity. So you're in Klaxoon and you should see a pink activity bar that appears on your screen. And we just want you to enter one word about why you joined this breakout session. If you have to enter more than one word, we just ask that you put a hyphen in between the words so that it shows up on the screen. Got curious, curiosity, experience, intrigue, post-performance. Good job on the hyphen there.
Nice.
There is some awesome, there's so much coming in here, Juliana. And We'll give it about 15 seconds or so, and then I will send a snapshot so that you can all see what we're thinking. So we have engagement, architecting. I'm gonna open that up a little bit more.
I love it. I know. I'm jealous that I can't see all the results.
Okay, I'm gonna give it 5 seconds.
Missing out here.
I know you are. It's awesome to watch it live here. Efficiency. So I'm sending a snapshot now and closing it out. I will also take a screenshot and put that in the chat for everybody to see who wasn't there. So.
Terrific. All right, we're going to keep moving. It sounds like, I got some of the gist from Sarah about what everybody's looking forward to. And I love the word architecture, and I will tell you that a lot of our clients really kind of shy away from it, and we have a hard time using it. So it was interesting, and we put it into the title of this, and I was kind of interested to see if there was going to be any feedback on that. But sometimes when you put architecture in there, people think it's going to be heavy or take a long time or kind of cumbersome, and they get angsty about things not moving quickly enough. So that's a word we use a lot at Oxygen because it makes sense, right? When we talk about design and learning, we think about nobody would go build a house without plans and architecture before going and building the house, and I think we've probably all seen a lot of what bad architecture can do or can create when there's not a a very well thought out, structured plan ahead of time. So that's really what we're going to dive into, and we're going to be covering. We're going to be talking about all those different steps that go into it as it pertains specifically to what we're trying to drive as learning professionals and the outcomes that we want to be providing back to the business and the relationships that we want to be having with the people that we need around us to be able to be successful. So again, we're going to start out with a quick activity. So I'm glad you got into Klaxoon, and we're going to go join it again. And Sarah's going to lead this first activity where we get some engagement. So as you can tell, we're going to be engaging a lot throughout this hour together. We're not going to just give all the answers. All right, Sarah.
Awesome. So back in Klaxoon, you guys should see the participate button. And we just have a list of different components that we, as learning people, use to develop an approach to designing learning content. Also have those on the screen here for those of you who are not in Klaxoon. We just want you to organize those components and the approach that you currently use to develop learning content. I'll give you about a minute to do this. Looks like we've got about half the people have completed it already.
Awesome.
Don't worry, this isn't graded.
Yeah, this is not a test. We did that yesterday in our own testing. All right, well, this was really actually just to kind of get us into that mindset of, the order and how do we figure things out. And what I've learned over the years is how we approach it isn't always how a lot of people in our industry approach it. And, and sometimes the people from our business side come in and they, we've probably all been party to this where they say, so we need to create something. And I was thinking it's going to be like this 2-day event. What do you think? And that always kind of blew my mind because I was like, how can you decide that this is some 2-day event when we don't even know what it is that we're trying to do? And so that's that timing aspect or the duration. And so, we've really codified how we approach this over the years and given it a different structure than we've seen a lot of others in our profession do over the years. And it's worked really well. And when we back up and do it with the client, they can, it doesn't always go overly smooth, to be honest, because they want some of those like immediate answers. So we really have to balance that. But once we get to the point of designing and creation, they very much appreciate and look back on the process that we put them through and understand it. They have their own moment of how this happens. So that's kind of neat to watch. Sarah, how are we doing? Can I keep us moving?
Yeah, go ahead. I already closed it out, so you can move on to the next slide.
Awesome. So this is the high level overview that we use when we create what we call an experience map. And that experience map is really the blueprint and the architecture of what it is that's going to be designed and created, that somebody's going to go through in order to learn something, to be able to do something at work. We look at it as starting with the outcome first, understanding how you can really drive a business measurement. We're going to dive into that. We then look at the content. So if somebody has to do that, then what's all that content behind that somebody needs to know and do to be able to reach the outcome? And then we start grouping themes, putting things together, and then we look at duration and like what it might take for somebody to actually do something. And then after that, we break down into modalities. And once you have that, you have a very clear picture of what it is that you're going to be creating from an experience perspective. So we're going to dive in and just go through each one of these, and we're going to interact with you, and you're going to continue to do some Klaxoon things as we walk through. But we're going to start here with the outcome. I think what's really interesting with outcomes, and we've done a lot of research at Oxygen about outcomes and business outcomes versus, potentially something that we would say is not a business outcome, but is still measured by a lot of the learning organizations that we work with. What I've learned when you're defining an outcome is that the important part is understanding, I don't believe you can create an outcome without knowing the specific role you're designing for. And that's a really key aspect in this, is that I think as learning professionals, we're asked a lot of times, hey, can you create this thing for everybody? Or, we've been in the position where we'll be talking to a client and they'll say, we have this onboarding for our sellers, it's not working, but blah, blah, blah. And I say, okay, well, who in sales is this meant for? And they say the sellers. And I say, okay, so all sellers go through the same onboarding? And then they say, yeah. How many sales roles do you have? 18. Well, all those 18 different, types of sellers don't have the same job. And so when we're thinking about outcomes, we really take a role-based view on it, because otherwise it's very difficult. It's like the first stumbling block to actually being able to track a business metric. So if you can break it down by role when you're defining the outcome, and then figure out what it means to be onboarded, or what it means to, sell a new product, or what it means to do something that somebody has to do in their role to be successful and add to the value of the organization. So we start doing, we start brainstorming a lot of what does that look like? And we spend a lot of time in this space thinking about how to make this measurable, because without that, it's very difficult to explain later down the road about why it is that you're asking somebody to go through some sort of learning that's been created for them. If you can't tie it back to what they need to be doing in their role, in my mind, they don't necessarily need to be going through it. So that's something to keep in mind as we're talking about defining the outcome and making it measurable. This is, so we're going to do an activity before we talk kind of through some of the measuring the business impact. But what we've learned through some research that we've done is that high-performing organizations measure the impact of the stuff they create, and they can connect it to a business outcome. We're going to talk more about what that means, but we're going to first give you an activity where you're going to get a bunch of different types of outcome and be able to categorize them yourself of, is this a business outcome, or is this just something that we could create and have more data around in our organization? So Sarah, I'll let you take this over.
Fantastic. Okay, so go ahead and head back on over to Klaxoon and click on the participate button that you see there on screen. And we just have a list of different metrics and learning metrics here that are often used. And we just like you to go through and determine which ones measure business impact and which ones do not measure business impact. So we'll spend about a minute or so on this activity here. looks like we have some answers coming in already.
I love that we have such an active group on the chat too. That's awesome.
Yeah. Looks like we're about 2/3 have completed this activity. Let me give it another 20 seconds or so. Don't worry, again, it's not graded. You will see the results when you submit, but we're not
Definitely not graded.
Looking into it.
In fact, we did it with a couple people on my team yesterday, and this is in the book, and everybody got like 37%. Like, percentages were not amazing. So,
yep.
So don't worry, we all have room constantly, and it's a constant practice, right? Like so many of the things that are important.
Cool. So it looks like we have most people. Juliana, if you want to move on to the next slide, I'll keep this open for another minute or so if people want to finish.
Terrific. So when we did the research, what we found really fascinating is that, so this is kind of how it breaks down, right, of the things that we just gave you on the activity. We found that 18% of the companies that we talked to were actually measuring business impact, and almost 60% were not measuring what we would say is clear business impact. I kind of want to sit in that moment for a second, because there's so much room to be able to obviously move into the business impact, and there's so much more data and measurement happening today that I think this is really important as learning professionals, and in my mind, elevating what it is that we do in the organization, that we really start looking at how do we measure that business impact, because that's how you're going to get more funding, you're going to get the ear of your C-level executives, and you're really going to become a partner in the business to making that a success. And more than likely, like everybody that's on this call, I have a huge passion for, we are one of the most important aspects to an organization is the development of the people. And if you're not connected to the business and you're not seen as adding the value and you're not able to show the value, it makes it really, really difficult to do your job. And so if, in my mind, if we can continue down that route of explaining what it is or that we need to be able to show the business impact, I think that you'll see that your conversations elevate more and more and more through time. And if we keep just measuring the impact of like how many people showed up, you know, this is the typical butts and seats, and what's the future. This is also about, you know, were people happy with what they got? Did they like the facilitator? You know, we've all been a part of those surveys that don't really tell you anything more than, and then you get all these comments about like the food wasn't great, or we're in a virtual environment and this is hard. You get those where it doesn't really tell you much about what somebody's actually able to take away and do on the job. So I can't kind of stress the importance of this step more, and to also say that it can be difficult to get down to something that you can actually figure out how to measure. And so doing that work, I think, is just super important. And we'll continue to talk about it. And as we go further, we have kind of some examples of it as well. We're going to dive straight into content next. So once you've defined an outcome, you can actually start to say, okay, if that's the outcome that we're driving for, then what content is in and what content is out? What does somebody need to know and do to actually do this thing that we've decided is a business measure, and it's super important for us. And you map all of that content back to the outcome. What I love about doing this, and when you have that clarity on outcome, is that the SME that comes to you, or the business executive that comes to you and goes, I really want this to be in. You go, okay, is that going to impact the outcome or not? Like, does somebody really need that to be able to do this thing? And so it helps you to really pare down the content which I think is important when people are learning something, is that we don't flood them, which they get so much information in such a condensed amount of time, has always been something that I've also never understood. It's like, you've been through this week of boot camp and now you're an expert, is really not how it works. And so when you have that outcome defined and people bring you more and more and more content, you can go, hey, that's great. Let's look at and see if it maps back. And then it's not you telling them no. It's this intangible that's a business metric telling them that it doesn't work. And you're like, that's great. We can find somewhere else to put your content at some other time when the outcome really drives that. And those conversations become easier to have, and not as much friction necessarily between you and some of the business stakeholders or executives that can be really, not a comfortable conversation, because I'm sure we've all had that VP that's, got their thing that they want to see you develop. So we're gonna run into our next activity. And what we've done is we've actually created a outcome. And this is about the audience that we have right now in this experience. And we're gonna let you create kind of some of your own ideas about what do you think the content, what does somebody need to know and do in order to reach this outcome? So Sarah, I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, cool. And Juliana, if you can just switch over and share your screen too after we've got people in.
Thank you.
So we're going to go through a brainstorm on determining kind of how we go about determining the content. So you'll go back into Clack soon and click that participate button again. It looks like some people were having some problems, so if you need to refresh, it should bring you back in there. And then you'll see in the bottom there is idea. So there is an idea right there, and you're just going to click that idea button and then enter the idea, answering the question, what does somebody need to know and do in order to reach the outcome of being able to complete a project with an internal client? So click that idea button, you can enter your idea, and then there is an arrow. You can just click that and it'll show up here on the screen.
And when we say somebody, it's really that instructional designer. That's kind of that role that we're looking at. Sorry, that wasn't uber clear, but it's what do you need to know to be able to complete your first project? And what we're saying is that if somebody's new and they're coming on board, in our mind, an outcome that you could measure as an instructional designer is that first project has been completed with an internal client. And there's so many different things that go into completing a first project, as we're seeing jump up on the board now, which is awesome. I love this. Like, yes, who's your audience? Audience. There you go.
You guys are good. I'm like, can't keep up with spreading these all around.
Yeah, this is going to make my next task really difficult. So bear with me as we go through this together.
So we have lots here. I think you can all see.
Yeah, this is a little bit like popping popcorn. As soon as it kind of slows down, we'll keep moving. And you can see with Clack soon, obviously you can zoom in and out, you can scroll all around, got lots of space, which is great for these brainstorming activities. The other thing, and we'll start talking about this, it's just so much, right? This is awesome. Okay, I'm going to let people keep adding to it. Sarah, maybe we just leave it open for a little bit longer.
Yep.
But I think I'm going to go back to the deck and keep kind of moving through this.
Fantastic. And we will be using this for our next activity too. So
yeah,
just know we're not ignoring all of these things coming in.
Yeah. So you guys are populating it so that we can actually keep going, which is, so thank you for showing up today. Otherwise we would have had a really boring event. So this is something that we've done with a client. This is just an example of what our brainstorm looked like. We use Miro board at Oxygen, there is Klaxoon, obviously, there's Mural, and there's Miro, which used to be Real-Time Board. We find it really helpful, especially in the virtual environment that we're in, to be able to set something up that has some structure, but that people can then brainstorm and give you their input to. And so you can see that this one was about an onboarding for sellers. And, you know, there's a lot of different brainstorming around it. And when
Juliana,
you start, oh yeah.
Sorry, your
That's
screen
okay.
is cut off. I wonder if maybe put it in presenter mode.
I think it is in presenter mode, but let me see if my share, hang on. Sometimes it's the share.
Sorry.
That's okay. We'll see if this works.
There you go.
Okay. That's the fun of a live event and having to switch back and forth between things. So this was a live event. This is something that we did. One of the things when you're brainstorming an outcome or brainstorming these things is that, and we had this with this client that we did the work with, is that we learned really quickly that a lot of people have a lot of different views on what it means to be onboarded into a role. The learning HR side of the house looked at it more from like, did they get through day one, right? Did they get laptops? Did they get set up? Did they get like the overview on our culture? And then they're off. And people that are in a role that we're managing these people see it as like something that actually gets done for the job that they've been hired for. So there's a really rich dialogue that can happen about that and clarity that can be driven. And as Brene Brown says, clear is kind. So we always drive that, like, you know, the more clarity we can drive, the better it is for everybody. So it's just an example. You guys are creating this right now yourself on the back end around the outcome that we gave you. The next part on creating an experience map is all around theme. And this is really about taking all of that work that you've done and how do we start grouping it, right? How do we start to organize it and put it into some sort of structure that is going to make sense? There's flow that goes into this, right? So once we have our groupings, what's the logical sequence of learning these things? What's the logical sequence that somebody goes through them to be able to get to the outcome? And how do they build upon themselves? And so that's really the next step that we take always. We've got this huge brainstorm. Now, what do we do with it? We got to group it, theme it. And I think the most important thing is also to flow it out and and then you start to see, you know, the experience really start to come together. So Sarah, I know we're back into the activity and I'm going to switch out to the other screen while you set it up.
Awesome. So we are going back into that Klaxoon. And if you look on your screen, you have a little circle that says views in the lower right-hand corner. Go ahead and just click on that views, and then you'll see different view options. So there's board, column, and list. And what we want you to do is go to column. So Juliana, I'm going to have you do that too as well in that lower right-hand corner. And
thank you.
There you go. And so this is one way that we can group things, and I'll let Juliana lead to it, but we do have some columns up there at the top: technology, collaboration, company culture, HR, operations, learning theory. If there's, you know, a theme that is not in there, go ahead and put it in the chat and I'll try to add a column in. We don't want to get too crazy with columns, but want to make sure we capture everything.
I love it. People are grouping them themselves. Go for it.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to do it, but everybody's doing it. This is awesome.
I love it. I love it. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So start organizing them. We created these buckets just to have an organizing construct that we could all work within. And later on, I'll show you kind of a end-to-end experience map and how we divide up some of these different things, because these buckets around, you know, technology are going to break down into like, you know, what does somebody need to know first? And then maybe down the road, they're going to need to know something else. And so they get interwoven. It's not so great at like just bucketing them into these very specific categories, but we did it for the sake of this event. This is great. And you can see here, you can scroll up and down. The colors also start to become interesting at this point from the Klaxoon perspective, where you can start designating certain colors for certain areas.
And feel free, everybody, to just kind of drag them over yourself. I think that was great that we did it that way.
You could probably put something on like skills/capabilities, Sarah, as a form there.
Okay, there you go.
Nice, there you go. I look at scope as being able to do that. So the other thing is you start to see the double up, right? Stakeholders, question mark, who are they? How do we figure out who they are?
Cool. And
there's a bunch of things. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't know, Juliana, if you want to go through all of them and group all of them, or we can also continue. Totally up to you.
Yeah, no, I'm going to keep going actually. So I think everybody's getting it, right? So you start taking all this content and bucketing it and theming it out. And we're going to go back to the deck. Hang with me. Sarah, tell me if I have lines on my deck, because I probably will.
Yeah, you have the lines again.
So fascinating. Let's see if this works. Do we still have the lines?
Nope, you're good.
Okay. Except one second. So from here, there we go. We're going to start talking about duration. So after you've themed everything, what we tend to find is that you can start talking about how long it's going to take for somebody to get through this. So one of the critical things I want you to think about now is all those things that you wrote down. If you were new to a company and the outcome was that you have to finish your first project successfully, think about how much time that would actually take you in reality to go from your day one all the way through to when that happened. My guess is that it's not a week. It's probably not even a month. It's probably somewhere in that 3 to 4 month range. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of research out there about being onboarded and when somebody is actually onboarded. And it tends to be, it has been historically, at least between that 6 to 9 month range is when you can say somebody's actually fully onboarded. I think that's shifting and changing personally. And you can see it because I don't know that we were fully clear on what that meant. What did it mean to be fully productive in your role? Because you have to decide on something to measure. So what we do with clients and what I find really helpful during this time is that once that's all out and then it's grouped and you have an outcome, and then you can go back to that stakeholder and go, so those 4 hours that you wanted to give me are probably not going to meet what you want to have happen. So now what do we do, right? And then it gets them thinking. They go, okay, I get it. Let's talk about this. You're right. So how do we space it out? How do we figure out how much time is actually going to be needed? And a lot of times we find there's some sweet spot, specifically with onboarding, that it's a 2 to 4 month journey to get to where you want that person to be. And it really depends on what the outcome is. From another example from a sales perspective is sometimes it's a successful first call with a client. If they're like in an SDR role, that might have a shorter trajectory than another client where it was full quota, right? And that's going to take longer to actually ramp to that metric than some of the others. So you can start looking at all the content, what the outcome is, and then really talk about how long it would take to get there and start setting some realistic expectations. In fact, I just saw something on LinkedIn this morning where somebody said, this is really fascinating. There's a study that's been done and it's showing that just because people have the knowledge about this thing doesn't mean that they're actually doing anything differently. And I've had that conversation with a number of C-level executives, and they are seeing right now in the workforce a major gap between skills and knowledge and the capability to actually do something. And I think as learning people, that's really, really relevant to us right now. So what I see is that there's so much content out there and so much knowledge readily available at our fingertips that somebody can sound very good at something without actually knowing what it takes to do the thing. And that's a dangerous spot in my mind, because it means our expectations are going to be out of whack of how much time it takes for a human being to actually learn how to do something in a way in which we want them to drive this outcome. So those are all like just things and kind of food for thought in this when you're trying to figure out the duration of something. We've spent so much time trying to think about how to talk about this at Oxygen, because I feel like, especially on the executive side, the expectations are that it can happen very quickly. And in reality, it happens slower than what they would like. And we have found that if you go through this process with them and show them and talk to them, and one of my favorite things is to say, well, tell me how long you think it took for you to get to where you're at today. How many years did it take you to be able to do X? And when people start thinking about their own, curve and career path, they start to have some moments where they're like, you're right, that took me, probably a good year to be really good at building rapport with people, right? Or understanding the nuances of these types of conversations, or how to redirect without it coming off that I'm trying to redirect somebody. And having that conversation helps you to figure out that duration and timing. Oh yeah, so here's basically what I was just talking about. There is often friction between what the organization wants and what we believe is actually possible with the human person. And navigating those conversations, I believe, as learning professionals, is where we can really help the people side of our organizations and really drive clarity and expectations on what's possible. And that's a whole another topic probably for another time. All right, the next thing that we're gonna get into and talk about is modality type. So modality is fascinating to me because a lot of times, again, you get that person that comes and we get this all the time. They say, hi, we need your help. We need to create a 30-minute online learning thing. And here's all the content, right? You're like, oh man, that's going to be tough. How do we break that down maybe a little bit more? Or, is there, can we flex on this? But once we get through talking about the outcome, all the content that's in it, the theming of the content, how long we think it should realistically take somebody to get through all of this. And I look at duration from how long it takes to get through the whole experience, and then start to look at it in chunks of the content, oh, this is really meaty content. This is gonna probably take longer than this piece of content is really just about a process and an overview. It should be fairly quick. And then, so you start to kind of break it down within the content that you have, what you think is going to take more time than others, where there's kind of that more complex information versus the easier information to get and keep moving. And out of that, we start thinking about modality. And I love to just start mapping it out at the same time, very similar to the duration. It's like, wow, there's a lot of meat in this, and it's going to be really hard for somebody to get their head wrapped around this content if they're online, or if it's, done in a way that is asynchronous. I think we either need a live or a virtual live event so that we can have the conversation and talk through these things, versus leaving people on their own to go, kind of understand it. There may be other content that it's like, hey, I know a great YouTube video about this. We can get that going and then have them come back to do some work and activities, or this is an article, so the modality in our mind looks a lot like all those different asset types that we create as we're going through this process. But we start to really frame that out in the very last steps of your experience map. Some of the things that we think about when we're considering modality is to ask a lot of these questions. Restraints and constraints get requirements and constraints get thrown out a lot, I would say, through the whole process, where people say, hey, we have a global audience, or this whole thing has to be an online experience, and I like to start documenting all those things along the way and come up with it. And somebody put audience down. You have to understand your audience, right? So that's one of the questions here. What's the capability of the technology level of the audience? Where is your audience? We've done a lot of work around interviewing people and asking them questions about, where do you go and get information in your day-to-day life? Where do you turn to when you need to figure something out? Where do you turn to when it's kind of a simple thing? Like, I don't know about you all, but I have little kids, and I remember trying to figure out how to take the cover off of their car seat and to wash it and put it back on. It's not as easy as it seems like it should be. And there are lots of amazing YouTube videos out there that you can like pause, take it off, put it back on, and watch it. So that's somewhere where I would go to get information very quickly in my personal life. And I think about creating the modality type that your audience is doing already and meeting them where they're at and feeding them the information that they need to be able to learn something in that way, instead of creating something that might be cumbersome, or they might not understand how to get through, or it seems like another thing that they have to do. So there's a lot that you can do by diving in and understanding your audience and how they're going to consume things the easiest way. So those are some of the questions that we ask. We thought we'd throw them out there. There's also this view, and this is also in the book, around kind of different ways to determine modality types, and it covers some of what we've just done. There's also design principles that we really get into and like to define, because again, the tone, the voice, I find those incredibly important when somebody's going through something. I hate the patronizing, voice that we've probably all heard about. Now you should do this and you should do it like this. And so understanding the audience and how they're going to react to it, I think, is very important in order to define down to these very granular levels what it is that you're creating from a modality and design type. And so with that, I'm handing it back over to Sarah for some Klaxoon activity.
Awesome. So what we wanted to do was just do a quick word storm on different modalities, possible learning modalities that you could use for this experience. And so going back into Klaxoon, you'll just click that pink activity bar that appears on your screen, and then enter your possible learning modalities. Now again, this part is the test. If you're going to use more than one word, make sure you use a hyphen in between the words. So we're getting a little risky trying to do this activity here on the word storm, but I'd love to see your responses. See if people are able to navigate in. Haven't seen any responses come in. Oh, it's still in the same activity? Well, let me make sure that goes away. Sorry about that. Okay, are you able to see the pink bar now? Yes, okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I didn't realize, I was hoping I would be able to keep both open, but there we go. Lots of answers coming in. Peer-to-peer, great job on the hyphens. Podcasts, e-learning, instructor-led, in-person. Oh my goodness, it's coming in so fast, I can't even read them all. Video is huge. Animations, embodiment practices, web-based. Oh, this is amazing. Make sure you guys all, I'm going to send a snapshot in a second, but there's awesome things here. I feel like maybe save the snapshot too. You may have new ideas for your future trainings.
That's great. Sarah, how much time do you want to give to keep this one open?
I will go ahead and send a snapshot here. Let's give it 5 seconds.
Yeah, we figured this could be helpful for everybody, because I think, different modality types are kind of always swirling around and coming out, and we're all kind of on that forefront of what's happening.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, so I am going to send the snapshot now.
Cool. All right. So we're on to the last part, which is actually the experience map all up. And so I am going to, this is the last part of the process. All of those things that we've just gone through comes together to give you an experience map. This is an example of a rolled up, and I'll explain why rolled up experience map that we've done with a client. The outcome of this was, so this was specifically for a frontline supervisor audience within a call center environment. And the business outcome that we were working towards was lowering attrition. So as you can imagine, in call center environments, they tend to have fairly high attrition levels. And we were really trying to see if, through helping the frontline supervisors, who's the first person to impact an agent, if we could elongate that or lessen the attrition cycle. Because what they would find is that if somebody could make it past 3 to 4 months in that role, they would actually stay for 2 to 3 years at the company in that role as an agent. And so that makes a huge difference from a cost perspective, and from the people perspective, and from the consistency, and then ultimately from the customer's perspective, when you have somebody that understands and knows how to navigate this. So this was a huge, this was a huge problem, business problem, that they were trying to figure out. And an aspect, I will say, was training. And I saw this in the chat earlier. Yes, many times when we really dive in and talk about the thing that somebody wants, the answer isn't training. And I'll give you an example as we were going through this. And I know this is a little bit hard to see, but you can kind of see, we organize these a lot by, I kind of call this, this is like going into Hulu or Netflix or something and looking up a show that's been on for a number of years, and you've got your different seasons, right? And each one of these missions, as we call them, has an outcome attached to it. So when somebody's done going through all these different episodes, as you can see, right? So kind of similar, and there are different modality types. Some of it was online, some of it was in person. Some of it is what we were just calling micro learning, which were podcasts or articles or things that they would watch on their own. And then these things that they had to go do on the job. This, as you can see, this whole event took many months. It was over a 6-month period that they would actually go through this, and they ended up going through in cohorts. And there was a lot that went into this. And one of the things that we kept hearing from some of the VPs was they really need time management help. Time management, like, where's time management in all of this? And they wanted us to just like double down on time management. But what we learned going through the process and interviewing the audience is that time management wasn't actually their issue. In fact, these people could run circles around me with time management. I was so impressed with how they set up their days. The issue is that there was a certain kind of call that would come in that that would be very quickly escalated to the supervisor to have to handle. And they were coming in so often, and they would take up so much of their time, that their whole, planning of what they would be doing was just blown out of the water. So the root cause was actually how to manage these calls when they come in, and how to figure out how a customer could potentially help themselves before calling. And then B, how do you enable your agent to be able to handle more of these calls and they don't get so quickly escalated to a frontline supervisor. So it is interesting when you go through this process of what you learn and the business learns about what is needed from a learning or a training aspect versus, where some of the processes in the business might be broken, or where there's an opportunity for something else to be fixed in the process. So this is one example. The other thing I will tell you is this is the pretty example that we use for executive audiences to explain to them what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. And the back end is typically an Excel document that has, all that brainstorming that you did. It's got all these kind of high level, and then it's got, it starts to be fleshed out into, here's all the content, these are the themes, these are the topics. And you start to see your designs come to life in this Excel document that we typically use, and then port that over into different design documents, et cetera. So there's a lot of detail, just like on an architecture, right? You have your beautiful architecture that you can see, and you can see your entire potential future house or whatever it is. And then there's lots of layers behind that about materials and specific rooms and sizing and all of those things. It's very similar to that. You have your high level map and then all the details behind it. And we have time. So we're going to be doing Q&A. We have office hours between 11 and 1 p.m. I'll be around and happy to have a chat and answer questions. I believe the link is out on the site, or Erin can put it into the chat, or somebody's probably got it. And then we're going to do one more activity and then we can wrap.
Okay. So we have one last activity here. Go ahead and go to Klaxoon and click on the participate button. And then we just have these questions. What is your current role? I know a lot of you put it in the chat at the beginning, but it was fascinating to see where everybody was coming from. And then what was the most useful for you during this session? And what would you want to know more about? And Juliana, there's also a few questions that have come out in the chat. Should I read them to you and you can kind of answer them?
I can see some of them.
Okay.
On the call center thing, it's different at every call center that somebody put a comment in, but yeah, that is definitely a number per hour. I know that Microsoft's done some good work around the actual average time of a successful call is like 10 to 12 minutes, which blows out the like old, view of shorter calls. Missions would be the seasons, yes, and episodes would be like each episode that you go through, following that TV analogy. Is there anything else, Sarah, that I missed?
There was some way earlier on.
There's been, when I went to look at chat, there was like 80 something.
I know, I've had a hard time monitoring. I think if somebody has a question now, they could probably put it in the chat too. There we go. Yeah. And if you're having problems, try refreshing Klaxoon. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not finding any more questions. That doesn't mean it's not there, because there are lots of things in the chat. I'm laughing at some of the comments in there.
Yeah, that's all good. So if anybody's got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, I really appreciate everybody attending and the liveliness with all the questions and everybody joining in and jumping in. Example of the Excel sheet, we do. The slides, I assume, will probably be available afterwards. Erin, I assume we'll collect those and be able to hand it out. I do. I've got some great people on my team. Thanks, Eric. All great people. Yeah, so the percentage of quota attainment, what that meant is, so some companies say that when you're onboarded from a sales perspective, you're at 75% quota attainment, or you're at full quota attainment. So it just depends on how your customer or how your business defines quota for their seller. And it tends to be different per different sales role. So it's just something to go ask about. And what we were striving for with that client was full quota attainment. Thank you all for joining, and hopefully we'll see you in our office hours.